Today we are looking at a case from the early 20th century, so sit back as we go to Hungary. By the start of the 20th century, Hungary had become a relatively modern and industrialised country. In 1873, the old capital Buda and Óbuda were officially merged with the city of Pest. This created the new Hungarian capital named Budapest. By the early 1900s, there had been much technological advancement and accelerated industrialisation and urbanisation. Budapest was the first city in continental Europe to have an electrified underground railway system. The economy was growing at a rate very similar to that of nations such as Germany, Britain and France, and it was certainly an exciting place to be. The Schwarz family lived in Budapest, in a somewhat upmarket area, close to the river Danube. They had 5 children, the oldest being Gizella. She was followed by 11-year-old Gabriella, Velma who was 10, 4-year-old Karoly, and finally Margit who was 3. Their father was named Gizella Schwarz, and he was a respectable gentleman with a good position, working at the elegant London Hotel. On the 31st of March 1912, the people of Budapest were looking forward to the summer. It had been a long winter, and although March sees the start of spring, the weather had been cold. This Sunday was Palm Sunday, and in the morning, some of the Schwarz family had gone to St. Stephen's Roman Catholic Basilica for Mass. This was a very impressive church, named in honour of Stephen, the first king of Hungary, who ruled between the years 1000 and 1038. Gizella returned home at around 10 o'clock. Her mother was preparing food for the festivities, and a couple of hours later, she sent Gizella to buy some oranges. Gizella was a happy and obedient child. She put on her coat, said goodbye to her mother, and made her way out of the apartment. She noticed a few familiar faces in the streets. Some of her neighbours were returning after their morning activities. She walked to the small grocery stall. This area of the city was usually busy, but on this day, it was particularly crowded. People were rushing around, trying to purchase items for their Palm Sunday celebrations. She managed to buy the oranges at a stall on Lipot Boulevard, in front of the Moran Hotel. As she looked around, she realised that the weather was a little better. Although it was cold, the sun was shining. She started to walk along the tree-lined boulevards, back to her apartment. As she did, she saw one of the priests from the basilica. She smiled, and as they passed each other, she wished him a good day. By now she was only a few blocks from the apartment building where she lived, but 12-year-old Gizella Schwarz never arrived home. Later that day, her father contacted the police and reported her missing. The police opened an investigation, but their efforts failed to find the missing girl. As the newspapers started reporting the disappearance, pressure started to mount on them to do more to resolve the mysterious disappearance. Kalman Krachani, who was the lead detective for the Budapest police, was instructed to take personal charge of the case. A hotel porter had already informed the police that he had seen an elegantly dressed gentleman acting suspiciously and asking about young girls who may be able to take care of him. Another witness had described a similar gentleman with a young girl boarding a ship bound for Austria. The police investigated the lead, but concluded that the girl on the boat was not Gizella. Chief Detective Krachani discovered that on the 31st of March, the day that 12-year-old Gizella Schwarz went missing, an officer working on the other side of the river Danube had apprehended a man who was acting in a rather suspicious manner beside a ditch that led towards the river. He was carrying 2 parcels. The officer had asked the man to produce his identification documents, something that he was either unwilling or unable to do. The officer had then told the man that he would be taking him back to the police station. However, as he did, the man ran off and threw one of the parcels away. His hat also fell from his head in his hurry to escape. The officer did not attempt to give chase. Instead, he picked up both the hat and the parcel and returned to the police station. When the police inspected the hats, they found that inside the rim there was a black silk ribbon with strands of hair attached to it. The parcel, however, had revealed something far more macabre. It contained sheets of wax paper covered in blood. The officer filed a full report of the incident but it did not arrive to the Budapest police headquarters until the 5th of April. Chief Detective Krechani also learned that on the 2nd of April, an incident had been reported by the Electric Railways Company. They had told the police that on Palm Sunday, the 31st of March, one of their employees, named Adam Skeel, had come to the printing room at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This was particularly strange, as no one should have been working on that day. The incident was reported as it was believed he could only have been there in order to commit a robbery, even though it was later discovered that there was nothing taken from the premises. Another employee at the printing room said he had met Adam Skeel on the Sunday, just as he was leaving through the cellar door, and he had with him a large sack of wax paper. He asked him what he was doing, to which he replied that he had brought the sack from the train, but as it was torn, and he was near to his work, he thought that it would not be a problem if he went to the printing room to get some paper to repair it. The two men shook hands and went on their way. The description of Adam Skeel was almost identical to the man the police officer had apprehended later that day. Chief Detective Krechani believed that this must be the same person, so in an attempt to confirm his theory, he visited the printing office of the Electric Railway Company and asked if they used the wax paper that had been discovered in the discarded parcel. The manager confirmed that they did, and the wax paper the chief detective showed them was exactly the same as the paper they always used. Chief Detective Krechani also showed the manager the hat, and after looking at it for a few seconds, he said that he believed it was the one that Adam Skeel usually wore. He told the chief detective that although Adam Skeel returned to work on Monday the 1st of April, no one had seen him since. He gave the chief detective his address, which was 67 Kutverji Road. Another witness had seen a man of the same description drinking in the wine bar nearby. She remembered that he was acting in a strange manner and carrying 2 large parcels. Detectives were dispatched to the address. It was an apartment on the west side of the Danube, close to the Budakeszi Erdu, a large woodland area covered with large oak, beech and pine trees. However, Adam Skeel was not there. His girlfriend, Katalin Simko, had somehow learned of their imminent arrival, and when she told him that 2 policemen were in the building, he quickly left through a back entrance. Nevertheless, the detectives searched the apartment. It was not at all tidy and not very well kept. Interestingly, they discovered that Adam Skeel was actually named Janos Rumpf and that he had used a few different pseudonyms. Detectives were also sent to the printing office. This time they discovered 3 oranges and a red painted egg. Outside in the rubbish, they found papers which had been covered with blood, as well as a girl's apron. The police collected the paper and sent it for forensic examination. This revealed that it had blood and human hair stuck to it. Chief Detective Krechani concluded that this wax paper had been used to wrap the poor girl's head. He was also certain that this was the person who was responsible for the mysterious disappearance of Gizella Schwarz and instructed all the police units available to search the city to find him. Despite such a large manhunt, there was no trace of Adam Skeel or Janos Rumpf, and it seemed that just like when he had been apprehended on the 31st of March, he had again managed to evade arrest. The police were certain that little Gizella Schwarz, the 12-year-old girl who had mysteriously disappeared on Palm Sunday, was dead, but they needed to find her body. Hundreds of police officers were instructed to search the forest on the west side of the Danube. It was a coordinated effort, with different units taking responsibility for specific areas. They were joined by local people who were anxious to help the attempt to try and solve the mystery. Late in the afternoon, a police officer saw what looked like a small hand beneath the undergrowth. A closer inspection revealed that it was part of a decomposing body of a child, but just the torso and the arms. The head and the legs had been removed. The nearby area was searched, but nothing else was found. The torso had been covered with a grey coat, which was marked with the letters IC31. This represented the school that Gizella had attended the previous year, and the number of the coat hanger that she had used. The press reported the story in all its macabre detail, and soon not only all of Budapest, but the whole of Hungary knew of the gruesome discovery. An autopsy was performed on the torso. The results revealed she had died from 2 stab wounds. People continued to come forward with information. A tram conductor told of how Adam Skeel had boarded the tram going to Hooversveld some time after 3 p.m. on Palm Sunday. He often used his service, and the conductor vaguely knew him. The conductor remembered the date, as he had boarded carrying 2 large parcels and had failed to get off at his usual stop. Instead, he had continued for a few stops further down the line. But the reason the conductor remembered the date so well was because when the tram arrived at the terminal, the conductor made his usual inspection of the empty carriage, and where Adam Skeel, or Janos Rumpf, had placed his parcels, there was a fairly large bloodstain. On the 28th of April, the torso and the arms of 12-year-old Gizella Schwarz were buried at the Kerepesi cemetery. This is the largest cemetery in Budapest, and one of the oldest in Hungary. She was laid to rest amongst the tombs of famous Hungarian statesmen, writers, sculptors, artists, composers and sportspeople. A large crowd formed along the streets as the cortege made its way to the cemetery. Everyone had their heads bowed, and there was an eerie silence as the barbarity of the crime resonated amongst the onlookers. 2 days later, on the 30th of April 1912, the head of Gizella Schwarz was found in the undergrowth, not too far away from where the torso had been discovered. It was later placed along with her torso in her grave in the Kerepesi cemetery. Her legs were not found for a further 7 months. The gentleman who acted as gardener and caretaker of the building where Adam Skeel, or Janos Rumpf, had lived in Budapest, received a letter from him. His name was Peter Starak. He was inquiring rather a lot about the case of the missing Gizella Schwarz, so much so that Peter Starak informed the police. Adam Skeel, or Janos Rumpf, had asked that a reply be sent to the Munich post office, care of a gentleman named Sandor Weidmuller. 2 detectives were dispatched to Munich, and when the mysterious Sandor Weidmuller arrived to collect the letter, he was apprehended. Detectives told him that they knew his real name was in fact Janos Rumpf. However, he was not just a wanted man in Hungary, he was also a wanted man in Germany. The list of alleged crimes that he had committed was long and included robbery, assault, harassment and murder. A 14-year-old girl named Maria Schmelz had been killed in 1906, and her body had been hidden in the undergrowth in a nearby wood. Not long after, a 7-year-old girl had gone missing. Her body was eventually found covered in brambles in another remote wooded location. Janos Rumpf had also been charged for the murder of a young woman, but found not guilty by the courts. He was described in many different ways. Some called him a strange and salacious character. Others described him as weird and vulgar, but everyone agreed that there was indeed something very suspicious about him. A young lady who had been in a relationship with him for a period of time told detectives that she found it particularly odd that Janos liked to collect things that little girls would have, such as hairbands and ribbons. The Hungarian police looked into his background and were surprised by what they found. Janos Rumpf was from a wealthy family who were originally from Bavaria, and they had hoped that he would one day study law. However, he'd always been a nervous child, and this became worse when he got older. Eventually, his parents tried to get him placed in a special education facility where his behaviour could be observed day and night. Janos, however, was not prepared to be institutionalised, so escaped Budapest and travelled to Munich, where he found work as a bookbinder. When interviewed, he denied that he had anything to do with the murder of 12-year-old Gizella Schwarz. He was handed over to the German authorities, and on the 27th of April 1914, he was tried in the city of Augsburg for the crimes he had allegedly previously committed in Germany. He was subsequently found guilty and sentenced to death. 2 weeks later, however, on the 9th of May, he took his own life by hanging himself in his cell. He was never tried for the murder of 12-year-old Gizella Schwarz. In 1947, the printing office of the Electric Railway Company in Budapest was being renovated when workers came across a gruesome discovery in the basement, the torso of a boy. It was remembered that 42 years earlier, In June 1905, a 12-year-old boy named Istvan Petic suddenly disappeared and had never been seen again. Unfortunately, the police were unable to identify the torso, but it was speculated that this was probably another victim of János Rumpf. However, as János had died many years earlier, the mystery of who the boy was and who had killed him and placed him in the printing office basement will never be completely solved. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case